I'm going to very briefly introduce our guest for tonight. Um, Morgan Sears Williams is an interdisciplinary artist whose work is centered around feminist queer histories and collective memory. She uses analog techniques, including eco-processing of still and moving film, to create experimental topographies. And with that, I'm just going to turn it right over to Morgan.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see where everyone is coming from, too. Yeah, so thank you for the intro. My name is Morgan. I use she and her pronouns. And currently, I am located on the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam territory. But as you'll see in my presentation, I lived for a long time in Toronto on the land of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And yeah, I'm super honored to be here with you all today. I see some familiar names in the chat, and some people I don't know, which is so great. So I'm just gonna share my screen here. Okay. So I titled this presentation Feeling Images, and I think you'll understand in a moment. You'll see me kind of like look to the side a little bit just because I have kept my notes separate from the sharing computer. And before we begin, I just wanted to extend an invitation to check in with yourself throughout the talk if you need to get up, walk around, get yourself some water, blanket, just trying to be kind of as cozy and comfortable as we can. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the processes that I use and get into kind of a current project that I'm working on. So these are kind of like, I always feel like this meme guy in the bottom when I try to kind of go into like all of the different themes and techniques that I use, and how I see them very much intertwined with each other. So hopefully kind of by the end, you'll maybe kind of get what I'm putting down, in terms of how I see them all kind of come into play. And I wanted to also start with this still from Barbara Hammer's film Dyke Tactics from 1974. And she's kind of like the lesbian grandmother of experimental film. I kind of think of her like that. She's kind of, I think, been dubbed by that by like Wikipedia or something, as that. And she has this really, in her kind of half autobiography, half novella, half theory book called Making Movies Out of Sex and Life by Barbara Hammer. She has this quote that I'm going to read that I've been really thinking about a lot. And she says, "The time in my dreams seems to be time that can jump back and forth into past and future, time that is not chronologically sequential, but emotionally or symbolically sequential. One scene may seem totally unrelated to another, but is in fact emotionally related. So it is also time related if we can enlarge the word time to encompass a feeling image that connects with other feeling images and is a particular way of experiencing the world." I think a lot about feeling images, both in terms of kind of the imagery and what that might symbolize, but also quite literally feeling the film and the image that is on the film. And I'll kind of get into that. And I also want to kind of include these two filmmakers. One of them I know is here, Dan. Hi. And these are two filmmakers who I've worked with in the past couple of years who have really bestowed so much knowledge very generously to me. And it feels really important to recognize that and recognize how important it is that how important knowledge sharing is in analog communities. Um, so Tara Long, these are stills from Horses in the Year of the Dog from 2018, and she uses a lot of eco-processing. So she develops her film in plants. And so these stills are from this work that she did where she developed her film in hibiscus and lavender. And then Daniel McIntyre, these are two stills from his work Helium, and uses different types of chemical processes and working with hand processing color film. And I'll get into this in a little bit, but he also works a lot with video to film transfer technique, which is really important to my practice now. I'm very indebted to both of them for their generosity. And I feel like this is kind of that kind of knowledge sharing is like something that really keeps our film communities alive. So back in summer 2022, I was able to attend Film Farm, which is a residency in Mount Forest, Ontario. It's just like about 3 or so hours north of Toronto. And there, the residency is led by Philip Hoffman, who is a filmmaker based in Toronto area, but he does live in Mount Forest. The residency is quite literally at his home. So he opens up his home for about 8 to 10 artists for a week every summer. And this is where I first learned eco-processing. And we would develop our film and kind of like the plants that we would find on the farm. And so that was a lot of like cilantro, mint, tansy, weeds. Some people were using wheat or berries, and we were doing phytograms, which is the second image in from the left. And this residency was a huge turning point for me. So previously I was working a lot in still images, still a lot of like analog work. I've been working in a dark room since I was like 16. I was fortunate enough to have a dark room in my high school. And it really kind of changed my mind about my relationship to film material as well. And the residency itself has been running since like 1994. And they write kind of on their website that it began as a proactive response to the increasing cost and commercialization of film production programs, and also wanting to provide professional development opportunities for artists and filmmaking workshops. And I think it's really important to note, like I said, because I think so much of the analog and film communities really sometimes kind of like started out of this resistance, like an acknowledgement of kind of what is happening currently with the commercialization of film, with the dwindling of different types of film stocks. And that really like coupled with a desire to build something. And the residency, like I said, is in Phil's home, and he runs a number of the workshops, but there's also, when I was there was a team of facilitators. So Emily Pellstring, Scott Millerberry, Rob Butterworth, Chris Harrison, and Deirdre Logue were also running and really integral to the sharing of that knowledge. This is just a cute little picture of our cohort that year. And I think kind of in my what I think about in my practice and kind of my research as well is that there's really this like new line of artist inventors who are working directly with film material, who are creating new organic film developers and steering away from kind of these traditional toxic darkroom chemicals. So organic film developers like Caffeinol, which is kind of more on the well-known side. It's instant coffee, vitamin C, washing soda. Those are kind of well known amongst filmmakers and photographers. And then other kind of experimental developers, like I said, using herbs like cilantro, mint, tansy, or fruits like bananas and berries, vegetables like beets, or even beer and Coca-Cola. And I think like these experimental processes really highlight how this new line of artists inventors are invested in developing contemporary eco-processing. Like I said, really like coupled with this desire to build something new. So I'm going to go through some of the film processes that I use, and then get into a current project, and you'll see kind of how those processes align conceptually with what I'm thinking. Okay. So I've been working with some film decay techniques, both at Film Farm, which is where I did this freezing technique, which you'll see on the left. You essentially are boiling your film for about 20-30 minutes to really like lift and soften the emulsion. And then I just like put it in a plastic bag and put it in the freezer for about 10 minutes to harden kind of what you have softened already. And then you end up with these like really interesting kind of artifacts. Somewhat, some of them look kind of like icicles or like snow pieces um, on the emulsion. And then on the right, you'll see this work which is related to the ongoing project that I'll talk about, which was developed in Caffenol and then buried in the sand for about 5 days. The 5 days is kind of, that was a bit random. I just made a
Morgan, you seem to have frozen. Um, is Morgan frozen for everyone else, or is my feed the issue? Can someone just put into the chat? She has frozen. Okay. All right, let me try to shoot her an email. In case she doesn't know that she's having an issue with her connection. Oh, we lost her. Okay, so I'm still going to shoot her an email. She probably knows because she's been kicked off, but let me. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording because no one needs to just see me hanging out. And when she rejoins, I'll start it up again. All right.
Okay. Yeah, so the 5 days is a bit, arbitrary, but these are kind of the decisions that we make. And so this here is just an enlargement of the film that was frozen and kind of the different like artifacts that makes. In terms of kind of film developers, for those that are, really interested in kind of the eco-processing aspect, these are kind of different ones that I have used. Like I said, kind of this like herbs weed mix of mint and cilantro and garden leaves and tansy. I use also Caffenol a lot just because it's really quite easy. Fresh lavender and wheat also. In terms of kind of developing times, there's a lot of kind of different aspects to it. So one being kind of the temperature of your developer, like any temperature of the developer. And essentially you are mixing these organic materials with vitamin C, washing soda, and water. For some reason, I'm not a scientist, for some reason it just works. I know there are certain plants that are better than others. And essentially the plants have like this internal ingredient called hydroquinine, which is like also what you find in chemical developers as well. And generally I'm developing between like 1 and 4 minutes. So sometimes it's kind of interesting because that's generally like a lot less time than you might find with chemical developers. Great. So another process that I'm using is a phytogram. And this is kind of similar to the plant developer recipe because it is plants steeped in vitamin C and washing soda and water. And instead of pulverizing the plants, you're placing them directly onto the film emulsion outside facing the sun. And these are kind of two examples of how that has worked out for me. So this one of them is a expired black and white medium format film. And then the pinkish tone there is a Kodak 3378, which is a sound film black and white stock. And you can get these nice kind of like veiny type of textures. And in terms of kind of how this looks like for a moving image, this is the 60mm black and white film. You'll notice kind of despite that I slowed this down quite a bit, the images do take a while to register for the eye. And this is kind of an excerpt of a test that I did. So I have since kind of been playing with the consistency of the plant, of placing the plant so that it's easier to register if there's like a pattern or repetition that you're using. But it really kind of depends on what you're intending. So perhaps like the franticness of how this looks is something that works with your concept. And this film that I use a lot is a Kodak 3378. So it's originally meant as a sound stock, meaning that it wasn't really intended to have images exposed onto the film. So the images themselves, when you shoot with it in a Bolex, are quite high contrast. But what is great about it is that it is really inexpensive and it's easy to hand process yourself. And then this process here, taught to me by Dan McIntyre, is this like video to film process. So what I do here is I shoot my computer screen an inverted image on the computer screen at like 100% brightness in the dark room with my Bolex, effectively creating a duplicate of the footage that I have without having to rely on a lab to make a print. And this means that I can also process it myself in the dark room. I can play around with slowing down the video or playing around with repetition. And Dan taught me this technique as he also uses it in his own practice by using appropriated images or footage online and reshooting it. And he uses a lot of different chemical processes and hand processing to create these different kind of visual effects. You really have a lot more like agency over the images that you're producing in this way. And it's kind of like a DIY hack that I now just use with like kind of all of my footage right now because I'm having to do a lot of duplicates. I don't know if anyone has ever seen these underwater housing for a Bolex before. It's really fun. I'm kind of obsessed with it. And they're pretty heavy, as you can see, but they're really like buoyant underwater. And so these are stills from some film that I shot underwater, or like this one here is kind of more on the kind of bobbing with the water. All shot on Exochrome, so you get these really beautiful blues. And then I've kind of talked about this, but in terms of how I process my film in the darkroom, I'm pretty much exclusively using this like bucket hand processing. So essentially you're just like using the bucket and your hands. I love this giant Home Depot bucket. And you can essentially be as kind of gentle or harsh with the developing process. So obviously using gloves, you can kind of like really get into it, and through that you're also creating like a lot of scratches and marks on the emulsion, or you can kind of be a little bit gentler. And I kind of like also oscillate between gentle and harsh depending on my mood or what I'm looking for. Um, and like I said, you're actively creating these marks and scratches on the emulsion on the film. And for me, that's really part of my process and part of kind of conceptually what I'm thinking around in terms of my relationship to the film materials. And I'll get into that too. And so at the end of the film farm residency, we all kind of edit together something and do a little screening. And so the kind of short film that I created from that residency is these are a couple stills from it. And it's all hand processed, and some of them I dyed in turmeric and walnut. And at that time, there was a lot of grief and loss happening in my life, and I was kind of see this film as kind of like a meditation on that, and looking at different kind of grounding techniques, really. And so here's just a short clip. And you can really see like the effects of the hand processing in this, rather than say using like a spool or a Lomo tank where you get this much more like pristine image. I'm personally kind of not really interested in that pristine image right now, and I find the scratches and the marks are really evoking kind of something else in addition to the image that is there. And I'm really interested in if anyone has ever heard of Kim Knowles. She's a film theorist based in the UK, and she calls this kind of like hand processing technique, part of it, she calls this aesthetics of contact. So she says this privileges the unseen through an emphasis on sensation, which points to the politics of the encounter, the hand of the artist, and the layers of time. So I see this like aesthetics of contact as really like my hands on the emulsion during the developing time, creating these different scratches. And so that brings me to my current project, which is around Hanlan's Point Beach on the Toronto Islands. So Hanlan's Point was the site of Canada's first ever Pride celebration in 1971. And it's an important gathering place for the city's queer community. It's Canada's oldest queer space and one of the oldest continuously queer spaces in the world. So this kind of meaning that this site has noted queer activity since the early 1900s. So these are two images from the archives, which are the queer archives located in Toronto. There's a lot of erosion that is happening on this side of the island. So in the past 8 years or so, there's been numerous floods, and then that in addition to some poor city planning from the 1950s, in which the city of Toronto essentially created a garbage island that came off of the east port of the city and really changed the tide patterns so that it hits the west side of the island pretty badly. You can see here, this is a image from the Friends of Hamlin's Point, which is like a community group. They're doing a lot of lobbying with the city right now. But you can see here, this was the site of the first ever Canada's first Pride. And you can see here, this is kind of where it was in the 70s. And now we're up to these small sections. This is their Instagram. If you're interested, they post a lot of kind of historical images of folks in the area, but they're also doing a lot of kind of preservation and yeah, they're doing a lot of preservation in the area, really. And so in terms of, there's this geological erosion that's happening, but I'm also thinking of this erosion as a kind of imagined erosion as well, in terms of the precarity of queer spaces in Toronto and across Canada. There has also been an increase in homophobic violence on the beach in the past couple of years, which kind of leads to this like stronger feeling of precarity of queer spaces. And so this project that I'm working on, I kind of see it as both holding this joy and desire simultaneously with the grief and loss experienced in queer spaces through this personal and geological erosion. And like I said, using this hand processing, when I'm working in the darkroom, I'm really like feeling my film collide with itself, and my fingers are in contact with the emulsion and creating these artifacts and these like remnants of our encounters. And the abstraction made by the scratches on the emulsion and the grain on the 60mm film, I kind of see that as allowing this room for ambiguity. The intervention of my hand onto the surface while the film development is occurring, I think kind of can elicit a more sensuous form of understanding. At times queer artists are really asked to be overly didactic and educational in their work, and this abstraction can speak to the political through abundance. And what I think about this approach is that it provides kind of a revisioning, countering the dominant tendency towards clarity, but rather a form of kind of making sense and a constant process. And this act of intentional and unintentional loss of emulsion makes this work, which I call Infinite Kiss. And here I see multiple images existing at once. One image of two figures kissing, and another image of scratches made by my hand. And then as I project this on film, on 16, the lines that are made by the projector onto the film. The images themselves are bound by fluids like saliva and film developer. And the kiss itself is mirroring acts of desire that occur in the private yet public cruising areas of the beach. So the cruising areas and the beach are just kind of hidden, but close enough to the beach area. And I showed this work last fall, including both films on loop with the projectors onto the ground. And I positioned the film projectors on the floor. So you, as an audience, like you have to move around, get on your knees in order to view the film at eye level. kind of breaking up this traditional viewing situation of cinema that we're quite used to. And I kind of, intend this staging to provide more of an experiential awareness of the film, the projector, and also your body moving through that space. And including the projectors also feels very important to me. So the projection of this film is also a record of its own destruction in a way. So the film material is being projected on loop infinitely. And we are like witnessing its decay in real time. And the kiss is really changing with every loop. So the image that we see one day would be different to the next day due to the destruction of the film material and the image itself. And so along with the film is these scans of the buried film that I mentioned earlier, the film that I buried in the sand for 5 days. And I originally shot kind of the most visually eroded area on the island and then processed it in Caffenol and buried it into the sand dunes. So here's kind of a couple examples of what the effect was on the emulsion. And I'm really interested in what parts of the image remains and like what new images are formed. So here are some detail shots too. And the sand dunes on the island are really integral to retaining the structure of the island. They're a natural coastal protection against storms and high waves, and they also provide an important ecological habitat. And so these artifacts like sand and scratches and warping are kind of the remnants in a way of like the beach on the emulsion. And when I showed this work in the fall, I enlarged them into like 95 inches by about 35 inches wide. So that you can really kind of like get into the details of the emulsion that is like eroding from the acetate in a way. And so what I'm working on now is merging kind of two pieces of film together. So one is the kissing footage, as you saw, and also footage of Lake Ontario. So this grid is what I created for a manual hole punching process where I would hole punch the water footage and then hole punch the kissing footage and then like try to keep it into this like grid that I drew and then try to place each one into the other piece of footage and tape it. It was quite tedious. And so this is kind of what it looked like when I projected it. And so it kind of was trying two different processes. One of them was this hole punching it manually, which I did about 10 seconds worth, which was, I don't even want to think about how long that took me in real life. And then this other process is using a Cricut. So Cricut, if you're not familiar, it's like every like Pinterest mom's dream is kind of how I think of it. It's essentially like a cutting printer. Use digital software to program where the machine will make cuts. But the translation from the digital software to analog framing is not exact. So what was happening was that the hole was essentially slowly moving through the frames, but I kind of felt like it created like a nice movement for the circle. And I'm just going to show you a little clip of that. I'm going to have to open my Vimeo system so you can see it in motion. So this first one is really quite jittery. I think kind of too jittery for what I was looking for in terms of like the content. And I was thinking of this whole both as kind of a signifier for moon and the power of moons on tides, but also thinking of it as a peephole. So there's the one that is moving. Yeah, thinking of it as a peephole as it relates to the cruising areas of the beach, the pleasure and spectatorship, and kind of positioning us, the viewers, as participants. And for those of you who are into photography history as well, you may also know like hole punching negatives as kind of destroying them, so to say, or as a rejection of the image. So what photo editors would do to kind of reject images because if you hole punch them, they're kind of no longer usable. At least that is what they intended it as. So you might notice by now, I work with film in a kind of possibly unconventional way, you might say, in that I'm not really concerned with its preciousness. And in fact, I actually think it's a really durable and resilient medium. And it's really interesting to me to see other people's responses to this kind of non-authorized way, should we say, non-authorized by kind of institutions or like Kodak or like film stock companies. And I think photographers and non-artists alike have kind of this idea of how film should be handled, in that it should be handled with gloves, dusted, it should be clean. And for me, it's really fun to break that down, to view film both as a kind of projected image or scanned image, but also as a sculptural material in itself. And so last summer when I was working on this project, I made a TikTok titled "I Buried My Film in Sand and Here's How It Turned Out," showing myself where I was removed the film from the sand and threw it into the lake to wash. And I started TikTok a couple years ago, you know, like as many people did at the beginning of COVID, kind of as a way to like share my processes and my film developing techniques. And TikTok, I mean, we could go on and on. It's such a weird space. It's very dystopian. We're like surveyed and tracked and it creates such a different kind of worldview for us. So I kind of expected some engagement with the post. And after like 3.5 million views, the comment section was really riddled with these comments saying that I destroyed the film, that it was a waste, that it looked like shit, and I had just wasted a ton of money. But what was most interesting to me were these like very visceral responses. Like, this made me physically ill, this hurt, I'm dying inside, I flinched, are kind of like the most interesting. Like, why do people feel so strongly about my touch on the film? And I think it brings to light the ways that we view as a society kind of this correct or authorized way of handling certain materials. And like I said, like film is seen as very precious and fragile, but for me, I feel like it's actually really quite resilient. And I kind of think of TikTok as this like anti-institutional way of learning, even though it's totally its own institution, which kind of reflects my desires to continue sharing my processes through this platform. And I know some people say it looks like shit, but I know other people who have kind of saved those methods and recipes for future use. And I really think this kind of non-authorized way of processing and handling film, it feels very integral to my practice. You know, film is such a old medium, and I think as a lot of kind of new kind of like folks that are like really working very intimately with film are really feeling like these futures of films are being created presently. And as a queer DIY, kind of mostly self-taught filmmaker, I think in response to structural discrimination, we create our own ways of embodied experiential learning instead of relying on institutions and art spaces that at times can do more harm than good. Um, really creating art by and for ourselves and our communities with a sense of urgency, because to create was and is a form of affirmation and belonging. Um, and I think I'll wrap up there. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I'm happy to keep chatting. Any questions?
Thanks, Morgan. If people have questions, you can put them into the chat. And also comments. So I get a transcript, or I could not print out, but I could save a transcript of the chat. So if you want to just share anything with Morgan, I'll share the transcript of the chat with her after we're done tonight. So you can put questions in there, but you can also put comments if you just want to share something. And let's see. People saying that it was brilliant and fascinating and lovely to hear about your practice. And I really like the way you tied in like the destruction of the physical place and the material and kind of the social destruction that's going along with the physical destruction of the island. Like connecting all of those different forms of destruction in the work was, I feel like it was very effective.
Yeah, it was interesting too to see like some of the pieces of sand are just now kind of like formed with the emulsion at this point. Like they're kind of impossible to take out. So like in the images, you'll see these like looks like little crystals, but that's just like the pieces of the sand that they've decided to stay. So that is their fate.
They've merged.
Yeah.
Well, I love the ones I think initially it was the film that you had boiled and then frozen, and then the kind of detail shots from those pieces of film. I thought those were quite lovely too, and showing that destruction, beauty and destruction too.
Yeah.
So there's a question, and I apologize if I don't pronounce your name properly. Io is wondering if there are any experimental development methods that you've tried that didn't work out so well for you, or any that you haven't tried yet but you're interested in trying.
Thank you, Io. Yeah, I'm kind of so I'm currently doing my MFA at UBC right now, and I feel like my entire cohort, every time I come back from the dark room, is waiting for the bad news of what didn't work out today, which is just kind of the nature of working with these types of processes, right? There's like so many different deciding factors with how things turn out. Um, Anything that I tried that didn't work out. Um, I mean, generally when it doesn't work out, it's kind of to do with like the temperature of my developer as well. Um, in terms of, I mean, I really want to work more with like lavender and hibiscus, and using like berries or blackberries in particular, but like to dye the film as well. I mean, what I'm most interested in with these types of eco processes is that it provides you as the artist, like where you are, you can kind of like look and see what is kind of in that area that you can then use for your darkroom processes. So kind of like really working site specifically.
So do you have a particular personal connection with the plants that you're choosing to use, or is it more like you just mentioned, like if you're doing site specific work, you're looking and just finding what's abundant there or available there?
Yeah, I mean, I love working with lavender because it has such a strong history with queer women,
Mm.
both like the material but also the color. You could even think back to like the 1970s when like um second wave feminists were calling lesbians like a lavender menace because they were supposedly uh steering people away from like the women's movement into thinking about intersectionality. So lavender is kind of important to me, like in that way. And then yeah, mainly kind of thinking about what is in that area that is abundant too. Not just kind of clear cutting, taking things that are scarce in that area, but like being more mindful about the materials that you're using.
Um, Linda wanted to thank you for sharing your work, and she too incorporates destructive processes with 35 millimeter and medium format film, such as burning
Mm.
and burying and immersing in water. So the
Right.
destructive processes that you use really resonated with Linda.
Mhm.
All right. So again, you could put in comments that will be shared with Morgan after I get the chat transcript. Or if you have questions, this could be your last call for questions. So get them in there quick. And while we're waiting for any last minute questions or comments, just a reminder that we have a couple online things coming up at Halide. Uh-oh. Oh, Maddie, sorry. Let me back up and find your question. Oh, yep, sorry about that. I didn't see that. Okay, Maddie's question is from the hand punching to, was it circuit method? Is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Cricket method. Okay, yeah, she has circuit in there. So cricket method for splicing the film. Have you landed on how you're moving forward with that film work, or are there any other methods that you might try out?
Yeah, totally. Thank you for the question. So I'm pretty much going forward with the cricket method, um, because it's both technically it's way easier, less of a headache for me, but also I think because when you print on the Cricut, you essentially print on like a kind of tacky material, so the film stays there and the hole punched kisses stay in place. So then I can just grab the other film and kind of place it on top. So it has like the kissing footage will still stay kind of in line rather than kind of moving around. I feel like the moving around and also like, when I've had studio visits and kind of the consensus is that that jitteriness is kind of taking away from the really like sensual feeling of the kiss. And that isn't something that I want to lose in that work. So I'm pretty much, and right now, I mean, I'm working, this is my long piece right now, but I'm working on creating like about 100 feet of it. So about 2 minutes or so. But that's essentially kind of has been my next step for that piece of the project.
I wonder if there's a way to minimize that jitteriness, because with the kiss in the foreground and kind of like the background of the water, I got a little bit of that feeling of being on a boat or being in the water. That maybe if there's a way to temper it, you can get that without having it be too jumpy. But
Yeah, totally.
and I want to apologize to Daniel. I think I must have scrolled down through the chat too quickly because in addition to missing Maddie's question, I missed Daniel. So apologies for that. I mean, he wants to hear more about your experience with sharing this type of work on TikTok. Hopefully that won't
Yeah, I
be too.
yeah, it's you know, I really view TikTok as like kind of you really can't take any of these comments seriously. I kind of take everything as a joke. Um, and I've gotten some some comments have like crossed the line and I report them,
Mm.
but there's also a lot of people that have been super interested, and people who have like DM'd me asking for kind of like the recipes I use or like stuff like that. And I think like one of the other reasons maybe I didn't touch on um is I think like being a woman working in this area is with kind of like these older analog technologies and also within film. I just I feel like my presence of doing that is also like where a lot of these comments come from too,
Mm.
right? Of just kind of like being a woman existing on the internet. And so it's actually like it's been in many ways quite joyful and fun to do that. Because a lot of other people who are very interested in this type of work, like those are the people I'm really interested in kind of like continuing to share that knowledge with. So I just ignore the other people.
Yeah, so it's worth reaching the people who your work resonates with
Yeah.
and kind of just putting all the negative stuff kind of on
Yeah.
in the background. Right. Yeah, I think it's all how you manage it, social media and internet presence, how you approach it and how you manage it to make it kind of work for you. So sounds like, yeah, you figured out that balance with TikTok. All right. Any other questions that I missed? And again, apologies to Maddie and Daniel for me having scrolled through too fast, but any other questions I've missed, or anyone have a new question that they want to ask? And once again, you could put in comments. If that's all we have for tonight, I want to thank Morgan very much for presenting her work. It was great to see, really inspirational, like all of that experimentation. I love it. I also want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and hopefully we'll see you at another Light Talk, or maybe some of the processes actually that you mentioned in your presentation, Morgan, are going to be included in Anne's Silver Canvas workshop that's coming up. So if anyone's interested in learning more about those processes, take a look at our workshops page. Again, it's a virtual workshop, so no matter where you are, you can join. And awesome. Thank you all, and thanks again, Morgan.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Good night, everybody.